So today I want to talk about pre-spawn spinnerbait fishing. We're out here, it's raining, it's overcast, it was a warm rain, and that had me thinking spinnerbaits. So today what I want to talk about is a few of my favorite spinnerbaits, some of my best trailers that go with it, and some of the rods that I really like to throw it on. Because a spinnerbait, if you're not throwing it this time of year, that pre-spawn period, you're missing out. Some of your biggest fish of the entire year could come on that little baby right there. So stick around, you're not going to want to miss this video. So like I said, it is overcast, a little bit windy. It is screaming pre-spawn spinnerbaits. But there's a lot of things that I throw at spinnerbaits that I've played around with a lot, having been able to travel all over the country and seen on places where spinnerbaits work differently than they do in other places. Up north, I might throw spinnerbaits a lot shallower than they do down south. Down south, those fish stage up a lot deeper than they do up north, and those different spinnerbaits work in different parts of the country. So I'm gonna break down basically the 4 types of spinnerbaits that I know of and how they play in different fisheries across the country. I throw them all on basically the same gear. So that will be linked down below as always. But guys, these are tips that you are not gonna wanna miss out on because it's definitely gonna help you catch more spinnerbait fish. So in my mind, there's basically only 4 types of spinnerbaits. You have your Colorado style spinnerbaits. Those are your big thump, your Jason Chrissy. This is the covert spinnerbait, works great up shallow when you got super dirty water. Then you have your double willow leaf, but this one is the painted double willow leaf. This is by far my absolute favorite, and we're gonna break down why here in a little bit. Then you have your big spinnerbaits. This is your ledge spinnerbaits. This is your deep water spinnerbaits, your ounce spinnerbaits, your big double willows. And then you have your finesse spinnerbaits. This is your Indiana blades. This is your smaller compact spinnerbaits, you know, on fisheries that have smaller fish. And we're gonna break down every time I like to throw these into different conditions that they play. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna start up north and then work our way down south. And up north in the pre-spawn, probably my favorite 2 spinnerbaits is going to be one, this Jason Christie covert with that big Colorado blade. And the reason that I like it is because it works great up shallow around cover. Works great around docks, works great around rocks, wood, over laydowns. I have some great days catching fish on these. And one of my buddies is now a firm believer. He went out and bought like $200 worth of these spinnerbaits because of one day we had on the water. And so this is a spinnerbait that I like when that water's cold, when those fish are just pulling up, when I'm fishing less than 7 feet of water, less than 10 feet of water, and I know I'm around wood, I know I'm around laydowns, and it's just a bait that I can really draw those fish out and really creep that bait super slow to trigger those fish. And so that's why I really love that bait. I will also throw this bait down south or anytime I get really muddy conditions where I think those fish are going to be in less than 5 feet of water, just because with that big Colorado blade it slows that spinnerbait down so much. And this time of year you get a lot of rain, you get a lot of influxes of water that pushes those fish up shallow, especially if it's a warm rain like we have today. You know, those fish are wanting to go shallow, so that's why I reach for this one most oftentimes this time of year, anytime I'm fishing less than 10 feet of water and that water's dirty. Now my second one that I love for up north is going to be this big coleslaw colored spinnerbait. And if any of you guys like fishing for smallmouth in the spring, dude, this is one that you have to have in your boat because smallmouth love stupid bright colors. It works great for spotted bass too down south and largemouth when you get really dirty shallow water, but those smallmouth get absolutely triggered by this bait. And one thing that really stands out is with how bright it is, you get a lot bigger bites than you typically would from any other spinnerbait out there. So when you get the right conditions, when you get high influx of water, basically the same conditions that I get with this bait, I'm gonna throw this one, especially when I know there's a lot of smallmouth. It is just a bait that triggers those fish like nobody's business. I put smaller trailers on there. I can still work it slower, but it gives off a huge presence in the water, and those big smallmouth absolutely hammer it. And the bites that you get on this bait will basically be like the hardest bites that you get all year. They'll rip the rod out of your hands, and it is amazing to throw this bait. My same buddy that went out and bought those bought a bunch of these ones too, because we fished a different lake where pre-spawn fish were setting up on shallow rock piles. We had some wind coming in, water was kind of dirty. He had been catching them on a swim bait in practice when he found them, but then in the tournament, I didn't know that. I didn't practice with them, so I just rolled into the boat with the tournament, and I showed up, and I looked at the conditions. It was windy, it was overcast, water was dirty, and he said those smallmouth were in less than 10 feet of water on this shallow bar. So I picked this up, and I think we caught 3 of our keepers on it first thing in the morning, just hucking that bait. I will a lot of times put a trailer hook on this bait because, again, they're smallmouth and they love to smash it. But dude, I'm telling you, that is gonna be one that you wanna keep in your boat. If you live anywhere that has smallmouth, especially you Tennessee River guys, if you live on a lot of big smallmouth and they get up shallow, dude, that's gonna be one you wanna have on deck. Now the other 2 that I have, you have this big ledge spinnerbait. This is gonna be one for those of you guys that live on brush fisheries. Those of you guys that live out on those pre-spawn fisheries that have deeper brush, they have deeper fish that set up out off the ledges and whatnot, that's where this bait is gonna play. This is a big old nickel spinnerbait, and I'll have all the stuff linked down below like I always do. That's gonna be the bait that you're gonna wanna fish over top of those brush piles, on those ledges, in between the trees, on those hard spots. That's what this bait is for. That's where when you found those fish Demiki rigging or something like that, but all of a sudden you get some wind and you can't set up on it right, you get overcast conditions, roll one of these over their head and you get bigger bites because of it. Look how big that blade is. You know, it represents those bigger gizzard shad, and it really triggers those fish when you get these kind of conditions. So that's when I like to throw this one. This is something that I also like to throw over top of brush that gets real dirty water. Say you found some fish that are living in brush, and all of a sudden that water gets dirty. They're only in like 10, 15 feet. Now you can roll a big white spinnerbait over top of their head and trigger those fish and still catch them in those same areas. So the last spinnerbait that I want to talk about is your little finesse spinnerbaits. And this is going to be for you guys that live on river fisheries for the most part. This is where I really like this bait. When you're fishing on a fishery that those fish are setting up super shallow, you know, less than 3 feet of water, and you're fishing for smallmouth, largemouth, whatever, that's what this bait is beautiful for, because you can slow roll it through those shallow riffles, through that shallow water, and still get those bigger bites, because it's going to put off the thump of that Indiana blade and that little Colorado blade on there, and it allows you to cover water. This also is great for those of you guys that live on fisheries that have smaller averages. So if you're living on a fishery that has, you know, 2 pounders, a good sized fish, that's where these smaller spinnerbaits really come into play. And that's where you can still trigger those fish and still get bigger than average bites, but your bigger than average might be 2 1/4, might be 3 pounds, but it'll still allow you to cover water and throw a moving bait up shallow that's not going to scare those fish away because it has too much presence for those fish. It's a smaller, compact profile that's still going to allow you to catch those fish. And as far as storage goes for your spinnerbaits, Flambeau actually makes a blade crate. And so if you look inside of here, you can see how many different spinnerbaits I can keep just inside of this crate. You can see each little slot has all the spinnerbaits that I can possibly put into it. And all it is little compartments in each one, little slots that have a little holder on each side of it. And I can store, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's probably 30 different slots just inside of this that I can keep 6 or 10 spinnerbaits in each one of them. And so all of my spinnerbaits that I'm gonna need for every situation are just inside of this crate right here. So now there's really only a few trailers that I like to throw on these spinnerbaits. I like to throw Z-Man trailers exclusively, just for the simple fact that I don't ever have to change out trailers. With how many fish swat at your trailer, how many times have you had to, you know, pull a swim bait in because they ripped the tail off? For what a trailer does on a spinnerbait, I like something that I can leave on there all day and not really have to worry about. And so these Z-Man swimmers, they're a great option. They have a nice paddle tail on them, give a good kick. The diesel minnow is a great option. But then you're also going to have your split tail trailers. Your split tail trailers are going to be your great option when you're throwing those smaller spinnerbaits, when you're burning a spinnerbait, when you're working it pretty fast. You know, a lot of times I'll throw that when I'm throwing that big double willow painted spinnerbait, just something like this on the back. Because again, if I'm going to put a trailer hook on it, or if I find those fish swatting at it, that's going to be the trailer that I want to throw on there, just because it doesn't take up a whole lot of room on there. You can also go with some of these smaller swim baits on there, but that's really about all I do for spinnerbaits. Is I have a swim bait trailer, and then I have a straight tail trailer. And I might go to a couple different swim bait style trailers to get that bait to rise up in the water versus fish that bait a little bit deeper. You know, if I'm trying to fish that bait deeper, I might put a chatter spike on the back of it, because then it's not going to have any movement on the back other than that tail quivering, so it'll allow that bait to sink deeper, versus if I'm fishing one of those Colorado bladed spinnerbaits up shallow, that's when I'm going to go to a swim bait, because it's going to allow that bait to ride up higher in the column, which is super important when you're fishing around brush, when you're fishing super shallow, or if you're trying to fish deep. Getting that spinnerbait down a little bit deeper is always advantageous. So lastly, real quick, let's talk about the combos that I throw these spinnerbaits on. It's the same rod that I really like to throw my chatterbait on. It is that Arc Invoker Tour series. It's a 7.4 medium heavy moderate action rod, so it loads up slower, so those largemouth, when they come up and hit it, it allows them to push it and still get the bait. And then I like to throw either a 6-3-1 if I'm fishing really big spinnerbaits deep, or a 7-1-1 when I'm fishing those spinnerbaits up shallower. I won't ever go real fast with it, and then I'll throw 12 to 17 pound line depending on how shallow or how deep I'm fishing it. You know, the deeper I'm fishing it, the lighter the line I like to go to. The shallower I'm fishing it, the heavier I like to go to, for a couple different reasons. It's going to allow me to fish that bait shallower, because that line's going to keep it up higher. And then if I'm fishing around shallow cover, having heavier line is really going to help me out a little bit. But if you get the right conditions competitions this spring. Don't be afraid to pick up a spinnerbait using these tips and the tricks that I've given you today. For more content just like this, hit that subscribe button to follow on with the channel. But God bless every single one of you guys, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.